My husband lied to me for years, hiding a second family. When I finally exposed the truth, he had a breakdown, and my in-laws blamed me for ruining our marriage. I've been married to my husband, Elliot, for 7 years now, and in that time, we've built a life together that I cherish. Our greatest joy is our son. He means the world to us. Over the years, Elliot and I have shared so much, but the way our story began is something I'll never forget. We met at my old job when Elliot was my manager. From the very start, there was something about him that caught my attention. He had this easygoing charm, a warmth that made him approachable, and a natural kindness that set him apart. He wasn't just considerate toward me, he treated everyone around him with the same generosity. The more I got to know him, the more drawn to him I became. At first, I didn't think much of it, but over time, I realized it wasn't just his kindness that captivated me, though that was a big part of it. It was the way he made me feel. He had a way of making even the smallest moments feel special, of making me feel understood in a way I hadn't experienced before. And before I knew it, I was falling for him. We started spending more time together outside of work, and with every moment we shared, my feelings for him deepened. Then one day, he asked me out, and without hesitation, I said yes. At the time, I wasn't looking for anything serious. I didn't go into the relationship with any grand expectations. I just knew that being with Elliot made me happy in a way no one else ever had. What we had felt real, effortless, like it was meant to be. There was mutual respect, shared values, and an unspoken understanding between us. I often found myself thinking, this is how love is supposed to feel. But despite how naturally we fit together, we came from very different backgrounds. I grew up in a stable, comfortable home with parents who always made sure I had everything I needed. Elliot's upbringing, on the other hand, was far from easy. His father was barely in the picture, and his mother relied on him completely, especially financially. She had no job, no savings, and as her only child, Elliot had been carrying the weight of her needs from a young age. If he didn't give her money, she would guilt-trip him or lash out in anger. He was upfront about his situation from the beginning, but I didn't realize the full extent of it until we moved in together. When we decided to take that step, I suggested he move into my place since it was larger and more comfortable for both of us. We agreed to split expenses evenly, but over time, I started noticing that Elliot was constantly struggling with money. There were days when he'd mention his bank account was nearly empty, and sometimes, he couldn't even afford basic things like groceries or gas. When I asked him about it, he told me most of his income was going to his mother. I understood his sense of responsibility toward her, but it was hard to watch him struggle, especially knowing that, if not for her constant demands, he wouldn't be in such a tight spot. It didn't take long to realize that our financial arrangement wasn't sustainable. I suggested we adjust things so that I would take on 70% of the rent and bills while he covered 30%. That way, he could still help his mother but also have something left for himself. My hope was that this would take some of the pressure off and allow him to breathe a little. Thankfully, it worked. The change brought a sense of balance to our relationship and eased the tension that had been building up around money. Elliot was able to continue supporting his mother without feeling completely drained, and things at home became much more peaceful. This arrangement has been in place ever since, and it's made life a lot easier for both of us. When I found out I was pregnant with our son, Marshall, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was thrilled at the thought of becoming a mother. On the other, I worried about how Elliot would take the news. Given everything he'd been through and the financial stress he was already under, I feared he might feel overwhelmed. I braced myself for hesitation, maybe even resistance, thinking he'd be worried about the added responsibility. But to my surprise, his reaction was the exact opposite. The moment I told him, his whole face lit up. He was ecstatic, far more excited than I had expected. In fact, he proposed to me soon after, wanting us to be married before our son was born. His enthusiasm and commitment filled me with a sense of security, and we tied the knot not long after. From the day Marshall was born, Elliot has been an incredible father. Watching him embrace fatherhood has been one of the most heartwarming things I've ever experienced. He's the kind of dad who's always there reading bedtime stories, playing basketball with Marshall on weekends, helping him with his homework. He's never missed a single one of Marshall's school games, always cheering him on, always showing up. Seeing Elliot as a father has only deepened my love for him in ways I never could have imagined. The bond he shares with our son, the way he prioritizes his family, it's only made me appreciate him more. For the longest time, I believed Elliot and I would grow old together, sharing a lifetime of memories and experiences. We often talked about our future, dreaming about what was to come. Elliot and I had always dreamed about the future, how we'd retire someday, travel the world together, and immerse ourselves in new places and cultures, hand in hand. So, you can imagine the sheer shock and disbelief I felt when I stumbled upon my husband's double life. It happened so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that for a moment, I could hardly process what I was seeing. To give you some context, both Elliot and I have jobs that allow us the flexibility to work from home most days. Elliot has a designated workspace in our spare room, his so-called workroom. It's always been a neat, well-organized space, set up with everything he needs for his job: a large desk, multiple monitors, shelves stacked with files and documents. He takes his work seriously, especially since his job involves handling confidential information. Because of this, he even installed a lock on the door to keep sensitive documents secure. I completely understood and respected his need for privacy, particularly with a curious young son in the house. I never questioned it, never felt the need to invade his space. But that day changed everything. I remember it so vividly. Elliot had stepped out for a quick errand, and Marshall was down for his afternoon nap. I was tidying up around the house when I noticed something unusual. Elliot's workroom door had been left slightly ajar. That was strange. Normally, he locked it whenever he wasn't inside. Figuring it was a good opportunity to clean up in there, because, knowing Elliot, there were probably empty cans and snack wrappers scattered around, I stepped inside. As I straightened up the papers on his desk, my eyes drifted down to a drawer that was slightly open. I almost shut it without thinking, but something caught my eye. A glint of something metallic, barely visible inside. Curious, I pulled the drawer open a little more and saw it: a phone. One I had never seen before. A strange feeling washed over me. My first thought was that maybe it was a work phone. But if that were the case, why hide it? My stomach twisted into a tight knot as I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The screen was dark. It was switched off. For a long moment, I just stood there, debating with myself. Part of me wanted to put it back, to respect his privacy. But another part, the part that couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off, needed answers. This was completely out of character for Elliot, and I had to know what was going on. Before I could talk myself out of it, I powered the phone on. The moment the screen lit up, it started vibrating nonstop. My breath caught in my throat as message after message flooded in. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. Then I saw them, the notifications. Multiple messages from an unknown number. And what immediately stood out was how this person was addressing my husband. She called him her boyfriend. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Frantically, I scrolled through the messages, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. It was a woman. And she wasn't just some random acquaintance. She spoke to him with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. She talked about how much she was looking forward to seeing him next week. But the part that shattered me completely? She mentioned that her daughter was excited to see her papa. I nearly dropped the phone. My entire body went numb. Papa? That one word sent me spiraling. It felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. My legs went weak, and I had to grip the desk to steady myself. This woman was talking about my husband as if he were the father of her child. The more I read, the worse it got. Message after message painted a picture of a life I knew nothing about. Elliot had never mentioned this woman. Never mentioned her daughter. And yet, here they were, speaking about him as if he belonged to them. I felt sick. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How long had this been going on? Who was she? Was this child really his? I had to know more. I tried unlocking the phone, but my fingers froze when I realized I didn't know the passcode. A fresh wave of frustration and helplessness washed over me. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to wake Elliot up and demand the truth. But I knew I had to be smart about this. If I confronted him now, without having all the pieces of the puzzle, he could deny everything. He could erase the messages, twist the story, make me doubt myself. No, I needed proof. Swallowing my emotions, I grabbed my own phone and started snapping pictures of the messages. I took as many as I could, capturing every incriminating detail. These screenshots were my key to uncovering the truth. Once I had everything, I carefully placed the phone back in the drawer exactly as I'd found it. My hands were still trembling as I adjusted the papers, making sure nothing looked out of place. The last thing I wanted was for Elliot to suspect anything. I stepped out of the workroom, but my emotions followed me, crashing over me in waves: anger, betrayal, heartbreak. But beneath it all, a steely determination began to form. I was going to find out exactly who this woman was, how long this had been going on, and why Elliot had kept such a monumental secret from me. From that moment on, I knew I had to play it cool. No matter how much I was breaking inside, I had to act as if nothing had changed. When Elliot came home later that day, the first thing he noticed was that his workroom door was slightly open. His brows furrowed as he glanced at me. "Did you go in there?" he asked casually. My heart nearly stopped. But somehow, I forced myself to stay calm, shrugging nonchalantly. "Nope. You must have forgotten to lock it." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, seeming satisfied with my response. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, the weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. Elliot slept peacefully next to me, completely unaware that I now knew his darkest secret. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Everything I thought I knew about my husband, about our marriage, about our future, it had all just come crashing down. I wanted to break down completely, to cry, to scream, to let out the storm of emotions raging inside me, but I couldn't. Elliot was lying right beside me, the man I had loved and trusted with all my heart. And yet, in the span of a few minutes, he had become a stranger. It was as if every bit of love I'd ever felt for him had been drained away, replaced by a hollow emptiness and an unbearable sense of betrayal. How could this be the same man I had planned to grow old with? The father of my child? The one I had always believed would stand by my side, no matter what? I needed answers. I couldn't rest until I knew who this woman was and what she meant to Elliot. So, I made a plan. Once I was certain Elliot was sound asleep, I would slip into the bathroom and call the number I had seen on his hidden phone. I figured if I called late enough, there was a good chance she'd be asleep, and I might get her voicemail. If I was lucky, her voicemail greeting would give me some kind of clue, maybe even her name. I had no idea where this woman lived, but at this point, I was willing to take the risk. The need to uncover the truth overpowered any hesitation I might have had. Hours passed. The house fell silent. The only sound was Elliot's steady breathing beside me. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly slid out of bed, careful not to wake him. Step by step, I tiptoed to the bathroom, shutting the door behind me as quietly as possible. With trembling hands, I pulled up the number from the photos I had taken earlier. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and pressed call. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Each ring felt like an eternity. Then, finally, the ringing stopped. A voice came through the receiver, a soft, cheerful voice. It was a voicemail. "Hey. You've reached Tessa. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message, and I'll get back to you." I stood there, frozen, gripping my phone as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. Tessa. That was her name. She sounded young, light-hearted, innocent, even. Hearing her voice sent a fresh wave of pain crashing over me. Elliot wasn't just cheating on me. He was doing it with someone younger. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My world had already been spinning, but now it felt like it was completely shattering. This wasn't just a fling. He had built a life with this woman. A life where he played the role of a father to her daughter. I don't know how long I stood there in that bathroom, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of it all crushed down on me. But one thing became clear: I couldn't sit back and do nothing. I refused to let this break me. The next morning, I woke up with a single goal in mind: to take control of the situation. I needed to find out everything I could about this woman, Tessa. My first step was to search through Elliot's Facebook friends, hoping to find her. I scrolled through countless names and profiles, my mind racing as I tried to remember if he had ever mentioned anyone by that name before. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't recall him ever talking about a Tessa. It was frustrating, disheartening, but I wasn't about to give up. Realizing I wasn't getting anywhere online, I knew I had to take a more direct approach. I needed to hear the truth straight from her. If she refused to tell me what was going on, then my only option would be to confront Elliot, but I wanted answers before that happened. With a deep breath, I picked up my phone and dialed Tessa's number. The moment she answered, I introduced myself as Elliot's wife, forcing my voice to stay calm despite the storm brewing inside me. I asked her, point blank, if she had been seeing my husband, fully aware that she might not even know I existed. There was silence on the other end. I could practically hear her confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" she finally said, clearly caught off guard. I repeated myself. I told her that I had been married to Elliot for the past 7 years. That we had a son together. That we were a family. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for her to respond. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, she asked me a question that made my blood run cold. "Did you know that I have a daughter with Elliot?" I gripped the phone tighter. My breath hitched. "Are you saying he's really the father of your child?" I managed to get the words out, my voice so shaky I barely recognized it. Tessa hesitated, then spoke, her voice thick with emotion. And that's when the truth came pouring out. She told me that she and Elliot had been together for about a year when she found out she was pregnant. According to her, Elliot had been the one to convince her to keep the baby. He had promised her a future, told her they would build a life together. He had assured her that they would get married soon. She had trusted him completely. Never once had she suspected anything was wrong, even when he disappeared for days at a time, claiming his job required frequent travel. As she spoke, I felt sick to my stomach. The more she revealed, the more the pieces of the puzzle started coming together. Tessa mentioned something that struck me. She had always found it odd that Elliot had no personal photos on social media. It was true. His Facebook had never had pictures of himself, of me, of our family. Because of that, she had never had any reason to doubt him. She had never questioned whether he was hiding something. And now, just like me, she was standing in the wreckage of his lies. Tessa's voice wavered as she assured me that if she had known he was married, she never would have gotten involved with him. She was horrified. Disgusted. Not just for her own sake, but for mine as well. As I listened to her, my anger shifted into something deeper. Something more painful. Sadness. I could hear it in her voice, her pain, her confusion. She was just as blindsided as I was. She, too, had put her faith in Elliot. She had built her hopes and dreams around his promises, only to have them shattered. In that moment, I realized we weren't enemies. We were two women who had trusted the same man. Two women who had been deceived. And now, we were both left picking up the broken pieces of a life that had never been real. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the lies, the destruction of everything I had believed in, was crushing. I broke down completely, my body shaking as sobs ripped through me. On the other end of the line, I could hear Tessa crying too. It was devastating. Two women, complete strangers, yet bound together by the same unbearable pain. After a few moments, through quiet, tear-filled breaths, we made a decision. We had to meet in person. There were too many unanswered questions, too many pieces that didn't fit. I needed to understand how Elliot had managed to lead this double life for so long without me ever suspecting a thing. I knew I had to confront him eventually. But first, I had to gather my strength. Setting the plan in motion. That week, I came up with a plan. I told Elliot that a sudden work trip had come up and that I had to leave town immediately. That meant he would have to stay home and take care of our son. At first, he resisted. He claimed he had an important work trip coming up, too. I stayed calm, looking him straight in the eye as I told him he needed to cancel his plans. Our son comes first. I wasn't asking, I was telling him. And I made sure he knew it. He sighed, clearly annoyed, but didn't push back further. That was all I needed. With a heavy heart, but a clear purpose, I boarded a flight and left, behind his back. Meeting Tessa. The moment I arrived in her city, Tessa and I met in person. We spent an entire afternoon talking, comparing stories, trying to piece together the fractured reality we had unknowingly been living. Sitting across from her felt surreal. This woman had been in a relationship with my husband, and she had no idea I even existed. She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures of her daughter, a little girl with unmistakable features. There was no denying it. She looked just like Elliot. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay composed as I pulled out my own phone and showed her photos of my life with Elliot. Pictures of our son, our wedding, our home. A life I had built with a man I thought I knew. I won't go into the details of Tessa's personal life out of respect for her, but I will say this: she was just as devastated as I was. She, too, had believed Elliot's promises. She had built her hopes and dreams around a future with him, only to have it all come crashing down. We both knew there was no salvaging anything. The trust had been destroyed beyond repair. Neither of us wanted anything more to do with him. Gathering the evidence. As we sat there, I told her my plan. I was going to confront Elliot. I wasn't going to let him weasel his way out of this. Tessa listened carefully, nodding in agreement. "Tell me what you need," she said. I asked her to send me everything she had: photos, videos, screenshots of their conversations. Proof. Evidence that I could use when the time came to face him. She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, my phone was filled with images and messages that painted a damning picture of Elliot's deception. And then, as if this situation couldn't get any worse, another devastating truth came to light: Elliot had been paying child support for Tessa's daughter. At first, I told myself that supporting his child was the right thing to do. But then, the sickening realization hit me. He had been using my money to fund his secret life. For years, I had taken on the bulk of our financial responsibilities, believing that Elliot's money was tight because of his obligations to his mother. But now I saw the truth: he wasn't just supporting his mother. He was supporting an entirely separate life. I felt like a fool. Elliot had exploited my trust, my kindness, my love, all to keep up his web of lies. The anger I felt was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. But beneath it, there was something else. Strength. I was done being the trusting, devoted wife who stood by him no matter what. I was done believing in a marriage that had never been real. It was time to take back control. Leaving for good. As I left Tessa that afternoon, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was done. The moment I got back home, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. The very sight of that house, of the life I had built with Elliot, made me feel physically ill. Without hesitation, I packed a bag for myself and another for my son, Marshall. Then, I walked out the door. I went straight to my parents' house. I needed their support. I needed a safe place to breathe. When I arrived, I sat them down and told them everything. Every painful, gut-wrenching detail. They were shocked, furious. But above all, they were on my side. They supported me fully in my decision to file for divorce. The confrontation. It didn't take long before Elliot started calling, demanding to know where Marshall and I were. When I finally picked up, I felt strangely calm. I had nothing left to fear. In a steady voice, I told him I knew everything. His reaction was immediate. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped. I didn't flinch. I told him straight up that I had spoken to Tessa. That I had seen the pictures. That I knew about his daughter. His anger exploded. He started yelling, demanding to know how I could just leave him out of nowhere. I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady. "Tell me, Elliot, is it false that you have a daughter with Tessa?" Silence. "Is it false that you've been having an affair for over a year?" More silence. I nodded to myself. His lack of response was confirmation enough. But I wasn't done. Exposing the truth. Elliot had spent years lying to me, hiding the truth, manipulating those around him. Not anymore. I sat down and composed an email. I sent it to every member of Elliot's family. A few of my own relatives as well. I laid out the entire truth: how he had been leading a double life, how he had a child with another woman, how he had lied to everyone. I attached proof, screenshots, photos, videos. There was no escaping it now. I knew this would send shockwaves through both of our families. But I didn't care. The truth deserved to be known. And Elliot? He deserved every single consequence coming his way. Exposing Elliot wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my dignity. I refused to let his lies define me. Everyone deserved to know the truth, not just for my sake, but for the sake of our son, for the family members who had trusted him, and even for Tessa and her child. The fallout was immediate. Reactions from both sides of the family came in waves: shock, anger, disbelief, sympathy. Some were incredibly supportive, reaching out to offer their help and understanding. Others were confused, struggling to process what they had just learned. A few of Elliot's relatives even called him out, disgusted by his actions, while some, predictably, urged me to work it out for the sake of keeping the family together. Elliot, of course, was furious. He called me incessantly, berating me for airing his dirty laundry in front of everyone. As if I was the problem. As if his actions weren't the reason we were in this mess. But I didn't care anymore. The mother-in-law call. Then, earlier today, my mother-in-law called. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I picked up anyway, bracing myself for whatever was coming. At first, she sounded as shocked as I had been when I first discovered Elliot's affair. For a brief moment, I thought maybe she understands. Maybe she'll offer some support. I should have known better. Because it didn't take long for her tone to shift completely. Suddenly, she wasn't sympathizing with me, she was blaming me. I could barely believe what I was hearing. She actually had the audacity to ask me why I would let something like this break up my marriage. As if I was the one who had destroyed it. She went on about the vows I had taken, saying that it was my responsibility to uphold them, no matter what Elliot had done. It was as if she expected me to just sweep it all under the rug and go on pretending like my husband hadn't been living a double life. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. But then she said the one thing that made me snap. "Despite everything, Elliot provided for you and your son." That's when I burst out laughing. Provided for us? Elliot? Was she serious? I wasted no time setting the record straight. I told her, in no uncertain terms, that Elliot's financial contributions barely covered 30% of our household expenses. I was the one working long hours. I was the one making sure the bills were paid. I was the one keeping our home running while he spent his money funding his affair. And now, she had the nerve to suggest that I should feel grateful? Grateful for a man who lied to me, cheated on me, and barely pulled his weight financially? Absolutely not. I made it crystal clear I do not forgive cheaters. That's not something I'm willing to compromise on. If you want to keep defending Elliot, I told her coldly, then you can have him. He's not my problem anymore. Her voice grew louder, more frantic, as if she couldn't believe I was standing my ground. She kept yelling, trying to guilt-trip me into staying. I didn't care. I hung up the phone mid-sentence, cutting her off. And you know what? I felt lighter. She would never understand. She would never see her son for who he truly was. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I was done. Moving forward. A few weeks have passed since that call, and life has been chaotic. My days are filled with meetings with my lawyer as I push forward with the divorce. It's draining. Exhausting. But there's no turning back. Elliot has been trying to reach me constantly. At first, it was multiple calls a day, then endless texts, all begging me to talk. I haven't answered a single one. I see his name pop up on my screen, and every time, it's a fresh reminder of the betrayal I'm trying to move past. I don't need to hear his excuses. I don't care about his explanations. I already know everything I need to know. He was unfaithful, and that's it. I spent too many years trying to understand him, trying to make our marriage work. But I won't waste another second wondering what I could have done differently. This isn't on me. He made his choices. And now I'm making mine. Reclaiming my life. Oddly enough, despite how exhausting this process has been, I feel like I'm reclaiming pieces of myself I lost in my marriage. For years, I carried the financial weight of our home. I handled everything while Elliot reaped the benefits. And now, it's not just about legal freedom, it's about emotional independence. It's about finally being free from his lies, his manipulation, and the constant feeling that I wasn't enough for him. Elliot and our son. As for Marshall, I've made peace with the fact that he will still have a relationship with his father. That's not something I can or want to take away from him. Despite everything, Elliot is still his dad. But I've made it clear I will be the primary caretaker. Marshall will live with me full-time. I will raise him in a stable, loving home, free from Elliot's chaos. That's not up for debate. 4 months later. It's been 4 months since I last shared an update, and honestly, not much has changed in terms of the divorce. The legal process is slow, and as much as I want this chapter to be over, I have to be patient. But I'm not walking away empty-handed. I am determined to get as much alimony as I can. For too long, I carried the financial burden in our marriage while Elliot played the role of a neglectful husband. I refused to let him walk away without facing the consequences. I deserve to be compensated for the emotional and financial toll this has taken on me. Tessa and I. Through all of this, my relationship with Tessa has remained strong. She's been a huge source of support, and we keep in touch regularly. True to her word, she cut ties with Elliot the moment she learned the truth. Like me, she only accepts child support from him. Beyond that, she wants nothing to do with him. It's strange, really. This entire ordeal could have torn us apart, but instead, it brought us together. And I'm grateful for that. Tessa has shared updates about Elliot, too, and unsurprisingly, he hasn't been much of a father to their daughter. He hasn't visited her in months. That breaks my heart. Cheating on your spouse is one thing, but neglecting your child? That's a whole different level of despicable. Letting go. I've told Tessa, and I mean it, if she ever wants to take Elliot back, or if any other woman chooses to be with him, I won't stand in their way. I don't care what happens to him anymore. He's not my problem. I just hope, for her sake, and for her daughters, that he eventually becomes a better man. But I'm not holding my breath.